Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name's Alison, the online piano and the online violin tutor. So in this video I just want to talk to you very quickly about when you should be starting vibrato. Now before I go any further, I just want to mention that I do have 3 vibrato videos that I've done way back when on my channel, and I'll link those underneath here. Probably the last one that I've done, which still would have been quite a few years ago, but it's still a very good video. I haven't felt the need to remake it because I feel that it includes everything that needs to be included. It's got multiple different camera angles, and quite frankly I don't really have anything more to say on the subject. So go and watch that last video and maybe the other 2 before it as well. Sometimes when you're just hearing the same thing again but slightly differently, it can just help the information sink in a bit more. So those are videos on how to do vibrato, and I've also actually just finished making an advanced vibrato technique video as well. So if you are already doing vibrato and you want to move on to the next step with your vibrato, then you can check that video out. If it's out by the time this one is, I will link it underneath this video. So when to start vibrato? Now I get asked this all the time, and the answer would be to get it out there, a minimum of 1 year's playing. And by 1 year's playing, I would mean kind of 1 year's good playing, not sort of on and off, so you've done a little bit for a month and you haven't done anything for 3 months. You know, a good solid year's worth of playing. Whatever you're doing, a good year's worth of playing. Now, the reason why that is that the basics must be there. Now, again, I see a lot in the comments of people saying, I've been playing for 3 months and I'm doing vibrato. I'm all for moving on. I'm the most impatient person in the world. Those of you who know me will know that very well. I want everything now, and I cannot wait. Someone once said to me that the future is something that gets in the way of the present, and that is so true for me. So, you know, I get it, but there are other more important things on the violin than vibrato. And if you want to be a good violinist, forget about vibrato. Don't even bother doing it for a year. When you're first starting out, in the first few months, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever, there is nothing you need vibrato for. It's exactly the same for the pedal on the piano. I would say using the sustain pedal on the piano and vibrato on the violin are the equivalent of each other, so they are pretty much exactly the same. But there is nothing you're going to be doing at month 1, 2, 3, whatever, that you need to do vibrato for. It just doesn't work that way. So if you want to save yourself a whole load of hassle, guys, don't bother even thinking about vibrato. I know you want to do it, and you know, I know that vibrato does sound really nice, but starting vibrato too early, especially when you're not ready, is very detrimental to your playing, because not only does it take the focus off the things that you should be doing, holding the violin, finger position, intonation, bowing, everything, a multitude of things, but there is just nothing that you need it for. You're not doing anything technically demanding, you're not doing anything above the basics that calls for vibrato and needs vibrato. There are so many more things that you should focus on before you do vibrato, intonation being the first one, and then after that you need to be sorting out the bow. Without those 2 things, you can't even play the violin. You won't even have that down. So some of you have said that, you know, you've been playing for 3 months and I'm doing vibrato, I've been playing for 5 months and now I'm doing vibrato, but you know, and they'll say, oh well, I've got the basics down. But it's not whether you understand the basics in your mind, it's more about letting those basics sink in so it becomes second nature, something that you just do off the bat, something that you don't even think about. And getting those basics is something that comes with time. You cannot buy time, you cannot create time, and you cannot make time. So if I'm learning something new, which is the same with anything, any kind of craft, any kind of hobby that you're doing, when you're learning something new and you think you've got the basics down, yeah, you might be able to do the basics and execute them really well, but they're not in the back of your mind. They're not memory muscle. You're not just doing the basics just off and away like a pro, so to speak, just if that kind of makes sense. So you need to have those basics fully cemented in your mind, and I'm sorry to say, but that takes a good year for that to happen, because the basics aren't just about me holding the violin at 10 o'clock and me putting the bow on and then playing a few scales or a few open strings. The basics extend much further than that as well. So you should have basic bowing techniques. There's like half a dozen of those that you should know. You should know quite a few scales. You should know, you know, there's various things, for example, that you should be knowing before you move on, and those are all under the basics. Not just, for example, my first 10 lessons from my 1 to 30 violin course, which I'll link underneath, by the way, if you want to have a look. So it's not just that I've done the first 10 lessons, now I've done the basics. That isn't the basics. In fact, my 1 to 30 course is still probably considered sort of, a lot of that is still most of the basics. You are advancing as well. By the time you get to my course, you would be going on to vibrato, which I'll talk about in just a second. You know, the basics just extend much further than just holding the violin and, you know, just putting the bow on the violin, for example. So at what stage actually should you start playing vibrato? So it might not be necessarily a time thing, you know, it is at least a year, I would say, but it could be anywhere between 1 and 3 years. So for argument's sake, if you were embarking on my 1 to 30 violin course, which are these books that I've got here, I think most of you know that I have a 1 to 30 violin course, which takes you from a complete beginner to an accomplished, decent intermediate player. I would say that if you're on my course, that you would want to be starting vibrato around about lesson 25 and onwards. So you're halfway through book 3. So book 1 is lessons 1 to 10, book 2 is lessons 11 to 20, and book 3 is lessons 21 to 30. And I have divided those all out into lessons so that you will go from a beginner to an accomplished intermediate player. So by the time you get to sort of book 3 and you're kind of halfway through book 3, you might then want to start thinking about vibrato. So that should probably take you about a good year or so anyway, if you're accomplishing this and you're doing it properly. The reason why I would say in the middle of kind of book 3 or lesson 25 or the latter half of 25 to 30, that kind of thing, is because you're going to be moving on to position changing. So position changing is quite similar to vibrato in a way. It is, but it isn't and isn't. So vibrato is when you're doing this. Position changing is when you're moving up the violin. So it does have its correlation. It isn't exactly there, but when you are moving up the violin, you're going to be used to moving up the violin. So then it's much easier for you to manipulate your wrist and move your hand around the way it should be. When you're doing more of the basic stuff, maybe lessons 1 to kind of 20, for example, you're just going to be in first position. So you're not going to be used to moving anything here. And then trying to put in vibrato is going to cause you a lot of problems. So that's why you don't want to be starting too soon, because it is quite actually damaging and detrimental to your playing. And not only that, there is nothing you need vibrato for the basics. If you do start vibrato early, a very, very almost perfect indication and a perfect sign of you starting too early is the violin shaking. So whenever anybody puts a comment underneath any of my videos, of which there are many of the same comment, they will say that they're playing vibrato and the violin it's shaking. It's very hard for me to do that because I can do vibrato already, but you know, you're doing it and the wrist isn't moving, and then the whole kind of violin is shaking. If the violin is shaking, you're not ready for vibrato. If the violin is shaking, then you won't have done the position changes and you're not ready for vibrato. If you try and work through that, you won't, because the violin will just keep shaking and you're not going to be ready for vibrato. Do you sort of see where this is kind of going? You need to wait until you have those basics and you have fully mastered them and given it the time for them to sink in, not just think, oh, I can do them now, after 3 weeks I'm going to do vibrato. Trust me, it just doesn't work that way. Even if you did manage to get something out, some people will say to me that they've managed to get vibrato, or they've been doing it for 4 days and they've got vibrato, but can they keep the vibrato up? A lot of people can sort of do it and it's a little bit jolty like that, or some people can do it and that's it, they can't do any more. But to get a good handle of vibrato, it It needs to be a long, consistent movement where your hand doesn't tire, your hand is free, your hand just keeps moving like this over and over and over. So if you think you've got the hang of vibrato after 4 days, if you can consistently do vibrato and manipulate it any way you want, then that's good for you. But vibrato will generally take you months, several months, to actually properly, fully nail to the point where you can then move on and do all the advanced violin vibrato techniques. So I have just finished filming a video on advanced vibrato techniques. So if that's out by the time I've released this one, I'll link this underneath here. So yeah, there we go. I think that's everything I wanted to say on that, but mainly when to start, a good year after you've done the basics, and give it time for those basics to sink in. As I said before, I'll say it again, you don't need vibrato at that kind of stage until you move on to more advanced stuff, because the pieces that you're doing are so basic anyway, and you'll be so busy and focused playing those pieces, really, that you won't be thinking about doing vibrato yet. So just give it time. Trust me, it's just going to be the best way to do it, and you'll end up with the best results at the end. So I think I've talked enough on this subject. Thank you very much for watching. I'll link some videos that I mentioned earlier underneath this one here, as well as my 1 to 30 violin course if you want to have a little go of that. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.